All right, recording from our respective home offices on a very cold and snowy day. I'm Matthew Huffman, Public Affairs Director, and this is Momentum, a webcast produced by your coalition, connecting advocates across our state. So it is January 2021, which means that we have the start of a new legislative session here in Missouri. It also means we have a new Congress and a new administration in the executive branch. And here to talk with me today about all of that is our Public Policy Director, Jennifer Carter Dochler. Welcome back, Jen.
Happy to be here. It's always nice to start January with momentum.
I think so too. I really like that we're able to kick off the year by talking about our public policy efforts and kind of looking forward to what we're going to be working on. In this edition of Momentum, we're actually going to be framing it differently because our entire newsletter this month is really going to be highlighting the benefits of membership and really talking about how we work with members, how we lift up members' efforts and their storytelling for our public policy efforts. So I thought we could kind of frame our conversation today about all of the different member benefits toward our public policy team's representation in our state capital and also in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of the core areas of the coalition. And so there's a number of things that our staff do to benefit our membership regarding public policy. And of course, we don't do this alone. Later, we'll talk about our public policy committee and how they help amplify our staff's message. But one of the benefits is that we do have 2 full-time staff at the coalition who are monitoring legislation and being able to make recommendations about what bills are going to be helpful for survivors and domestic and sexual violence agencies, what bills might be harmful, being able to have ongoing relationships and conversations with legislators to make sure that our public policy really is going to help not only our member agencies, but also the survivors who they assist. We are members of, the National Network to End Domestic Violence and the National Alliance to End Sexual Violence, which of course have their own public policy team. So we work with their public policy staff with our federal Missouri delegation to amplify their message. So we're also having ongoing conversations about what is the status of our federal appropriations and legislative priorities. What can we do as staff in Missouri to be able to help amplify those messages? And in addition to getting new laws passed or preventing bad laws, our staff, as well as others on the coalition team, work on the ongoing implementation. Once a law is passed, it's making sure people are aware of it. So doing developments in the law trainings, working with departments on rules and regulations to provide additional guidance or adherence to the laws, or getting feedback from folks about how they're working or not working. Sometimes a law was created and it was really great for its time, but our laws eventually sometimes get a little outdated. And some of our legislative priorities this year reflect that. We're here to answer whatever questions members might have about the legislators who represent their service area, any sort of inside scoop we can give them. That's also part of our job is another membership of benefit, as well as talking to survivors. A couple of the bills that were filed this session was after a conversation with survivors about their experience and which legislators might be best for them to approach to file their legislative ideas. So we are here to help in all things public policy.
Well, thanks, Jen. That was a really great overview of just kind of all of our public policy efforts. And I think you bring up some really good points of our public policy work as a coalition doesn't just end at the end of legislative session. It's really a year-round team sport, right? Because we know that on the federal level, things are happening year-round. And just as you said, even after a bill becomes law, it's not just about how that bill becomes law, but how it affects the lives of Missourians on any given day of the week. And so being able to really talk with member agencies and advocates about how is this law affecting survivors in your community? How is this law affecting your work with other social service providers, other community partners? That is valuable information for us to hear, because then we're able to take that back, work with state departments on rules and regs and implementation, just like you were saying. And then also hearing from survivors exactly how laws are affecting their lives. That is vital to us being able to take those experiences and talk to lawmakers and policymakers about, this isn't really working. It's not meeting its intended need. Maybe it really worked for this amount of time, and now it just needs to be updated to better reflect the lived experiences of survivors and their families. So I appreciate you kind of talking about how we do have a really comprehensive way of approaching our public policy, and it is a year-round effort that involves not only folks on staff, but really connecting with and amplifying member efforts too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's different focuses during the year, but it definitely doesn't stop when the Missouri General Assembly concludes in May. We are in a state where our legislative body meets annually. So we know January through May, that's going to be our focus, but then we're also doing work at the federal level, and that usually picks up in the summer when they're focused on budget items. But it is an ongoing work.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the 2021 legislative session. So we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and legislative session looks quite different than in previous years. So can you talk a little bit just about the processes of how things are happening? How are lawmakers holding hearings? What's their plan for doing floor debate and votes? What's different about this year?
My mantra has been, this is one legislative session in many legislative sessions, and I have to keep reminding myself of that, but it is different. I mean, last year was different because of the amount of time that they closed. So the 2020 legislative session, we did start off normal, but then we had to shut down for an extended period of time. This year, it is unusual because we don't really know how long they're going to be able to keep meeting. The House already had to shut down for a week. So then we're seeing when they're coming back, as many things are getting scheduled as possible. We're just unsure how that is going to continue. It definitely can change week to week, but reminding myself, this is a very, very unusual circumstance. This is one legislative session out of many, many years. I know the intention of leadership from both bodies is they want to get as much work done this session as possible because they lost so much time last session, but how to do so. So some of the changes that we're seeing this legislative session is, folks are being encouraged to not come into the building unless they absolutely have to. Hearing rooms are having chairs spread out, but there is no mask mandate. So you're not seeing 100% of the individuals who are in the Capitol wearing masks. So there have been COVID outbreaks. You do see legislators and their staffers, when they've tested positive, they're now having to quarantine. You see more legislators choosing to listen to hearings remote, like online in their office, versus being physically in the room. We're submitting lots of written testimony this year. Remote testifying is not an option in the Senate. We're waiting to see what happens in the House, but offices are definitely being very understanding about staff not going and working with us on how to get written testimony and making sure that it is being submitted to all the committee members. So it's very unusual. Technology has been building in the Missouri General Assembly over the last few years. Like the budget committee hearings are now regularly streamed, things are archived. So that is helpful, but it's still not, you're not able to participate 100% with the lack of the remote hearings. But we're doing the best that we can. And again, people are very understanding for the most part of that. And so we're still able to email legislators and their staff, have lots of phone calls. There's many ways that we're still able to connect, but it's definitely going to be a wait and see how long they're able to meet. Do they have to break again? They're very clear on what their legislative priorities are this year as a body. There's a lot of focus on, COVID liability protections, adoption and foster care, and we'll have to see what else we're able to accomplish, knowing that week to week, something could change.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Jennifer. Week to week, things can change, and there are just so many unknowns. Um, that said, I do find it encouraging that they have been able to increase their use of technology, and so even for people not being able to be in the building as much, like I know that you and Colleen aren't in the building. We're not asking members to go into the building, but that there still is the ability to access that information and stay involved. Um, I do think it's also worth mentioning that with this sort of new way that we're doing advocacy virtually and trying to stay connected to lawmakers, I think that just really reinforces the need to build those relationships and maintain relationships with legislators and their staff members and keep them connected to member agencies as their constituents, and really understanding that relationship dynamic too. Um, and I think something else, just as a side note, that is worth mentioning in terms of the makeup of the Missouri legislature, we have a really historic opportunity right now in the Senate where 1/3 of senators are women, and that's such a really amazing thing for Missouri, I think, in Missouri's history.
Absolutely. The election results definitely had a very historic impact. And so we have some opportunity there, especially when we start talking about connecting with new legislators. This was a year where we have 1/3 of the House who are brand new to serving. There were a couple of Senate seats where oftentimes somebody will serve in the House and then go to the Senate. Occasionally somebody will run straight for the Senate. So we saw that happen this year. So we do have some basic foundation information that we're going to have to provide. But yeah, there were some exciting election results on Missouri's legislative body.
Well, you mentioned the priorities that the legislative body has started to lay out already, but let's shift and talk about some of our priority bills. So I know that even before session officially started, there were many pre-bills that had been filed, and that you and Colleen were really busy monitoring those and continuing to. So can you just kind of give us an overview of, one, how many bills were introduced, but then also what are some of our priorities this session?
So the House and Senate are currently in session, so the number could be changing as we speak, but it's approximately 1,500 bills as of earlier today had been filed. Legislators can pre-file starting December 1st. And we saw like record numbers pre-filed that first few days in December. It started slowing down by the end of December, and bills are still being filed, but it definitely slowed down. I mean, within like the first week, there were 700 bills, I believe, filed. And I think, again, it was an anticipation of this is going to be an unusual year. Whatever you're wanting to get done, file it as soon as possible. And then they had until March 1st to continue filing, but we're definitely seeing it starting to slow down a little bit. I know the last few years, I think the average has been just over 2,000 bills filed. So we do review all bills that are filed just to see, are they going to have any impact on domestic and sexual violence agencies? There's a number of bills that we monitor just because they are going to maybe impact one of our community partners, and we'll want to include that in the developments in the law training because we know our members would be interested. Yet not all of those bills are what we would identify as these are our top policy priorities that the coalition is really asking our members or others who are interested to promote our agenda. So what we put out in our January legislative update or any other month legislative update is really a more narrowed list of what we think really is moving and we need to highlight, or things that we're wanting to start laying a foundation for following sessions, even if it might not move forward this session. So we always have in that legislative update a more narrow focus. So there's been a number of order of protection bills filed this year. Each does something slightly different, but they are all addressing needs in our community. So one which we've seen for the last few years, but we do have a new sponsor on this. In the Senate, we've got an order of protection bill that would clearly allow you to include pets as a part of that protection. It would also allow you to cover medical expenses if there has been harm done to the pet, and establish clear custody of your pets. So that is something that's been filed the last few years, but again, we have a new Senate sponsor on that, and we're still working on a House sponsor, but very excited about that provision. We've also got 2 order of protection bills that focus on, one focuses on changing the definition of stalking. This would go back to what we talked about earlier is, sometimes do our definitions currently reflect practices? And so trying to come up with a definition that would better capture the way technology is used with stalking behavior when applying for an order of protection. This would not be changing our criminal code stalking definition. It would be specific for when somebody is applying for orders of protection, if they've been stalked using a broader range of methods, how that definition could be more inclusive. This is the second year that bill has been filed. Last year it did receive a hearing. It never voted out of hearing, but we anticipate it getting a hearing this year, and the legislative sponsor is also the chair of that committee, so we anticipate it getting voted out of committee this year. Another bill that he sponsored, and then we also have a Senate version, changes how long an order of protection could exist. Right now it is time limited in Missouri. It would still have that option, but it would allow for extenuating circumstances if a judge deemed, based on the behavior of the respondent, the potential of a lifetime order of protection. We've had a couple of survivors who have had a very challenging time. They're experiencing horrific abuse. And so rather than having to go in and renew, or apply for a new order of protection, to be able to say, based on the totality of what we have experienced, this warrants just having a lifetime order, so that they don't have to carry the burden of every few years going in and trying to, reapply or renew. So this is the first year that legislation has been filed, and some very compelling stories led to it. And then another order of protection bill would also look at also changing definitions to look at more like coercive control behavior. So again, there's a lot of different angles about how can we really enhance order protections to what we're hearing every day survivors are struggling with in their community. So we're hopeful about one or more of those order of protection bills being able to move forward. Another priority legislation that was pre-filed early in December, it has been filed for several years, is to allow unpaid time off for work for victims of domestic or sexual violence if they need to receive help related to their victimization. We do have a Senate sponsor this year, and it's actually been expanded to also allow parents of child sexual abuse. So if their child needs to be attending medical or going to counseling, that those parents could also request time off. So we're hopeful that having a broader collaborative effort with others who are interested in that bill, we might be able to move that forward this year. So that's just a few of the things that we're working on. And of course, big news this year is that we do have a Republican sponsor on the domestic violence firearm bill, which would make it a state law that if an individual is convicted of a domestic assault misdemeanor, or while they're a respondent to an order of protection, it would be illegal to possess or purchase a firearm. This has been one of our legislative priorities for 20 plus years. We continue to work on it. And of course, with that sort of focus, we definitely would need bipartisan support for its movement. So very appreciative to have a Republican sponsor this year.
Well, thanks for giving us an overview of some of those priority bills that y'all are monitoring this session. I think that's also just a really good way of highlighting another member benefit that you and Colleen are monitoring all of the bills and then really working to kind of distill down the information that member agencies need to know. Here are the things that we're really focused on this session. Here's how you can be involved. And also just trying to create entry points for doing public policy work that is more manageable for people. I know that a lot of times it can feel kind of overwhelming to know when and how exactly to get involved in public policy efforts. But I think the fact that y'all are so skilled at being able to monitor things really closely and then provide those updates to members is really vital to keeping them connected too.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the membership benefits. I talked to someone recently who said they had started their own bill tracking, and I'm like, that's great. If you want to call us, I can give you my list too. We make it publicly available at the end of each month in session. So January through May, we release a legislative update that's off of our website. We share it on social media. If people have questions before it's released, reach out to us. Again, that's our big way that we're promoting it to the public, but at any point somebody can call us and we can talk to them about what we're already working on. And then of course, once bills are signed into law, we do the developments in the law document, which is a very helpful tool. And then we provide training on that.
So in the beginning, when we started recording, I had also mentioned that we have a new Congress and we also have a new administration in the executive branch. So what are some of the things that you're talking with our national partners about? What can we expect on the federal level?
Well, obviously, with President Biden's history, we anticipate getting a Violence Against Women Act reauthorized at some point. Not sure about timing yet, but we do anticipate that being a priority. As related areas, we are anticipating a focus on gender equity at the federal level, some interagency work. So we're anticipating really having some positive traction on a number of items that we work on. That said, we are cognizant that there is not a super majority in either the House or the Senate, and that with any item, it's Republicans don't always vote together as a solid voting bloc, or Democrats. There can be different, people who kind of vote outside. So for example, we have a congresswoman in our state who's been very, very supportive of the VAWA provisions, the domestic violence firearm provisions to be expanded, and has voted as a Republican in support of those. So because of that, we know that there's still going to be some challenges in terms of what the final VAWA reauthorization looks like, but we absolutely anticipate being able to get that done under the current administration. Our first ask, though, that we are working on is the Victims of Crime Act legislative fix, to be able to secure that fund balance. There was a lot of action and advocacy towards the end of last year that really laid a good foundation for the 117th Congress, for people who were in the 116th Congress moving forward. Everybody seems to agree. It's just the timing and what's the best vehicle to have that fix. But basically that would allow more deposits into the Crime Victims Fund at the federal level to make sure those VOCA dollars coming into the state are secure for a long period of time, as well as the current administration may be starting to prosecute more than prior administration, which would also allow more deposits into the fund. But that will continue to be our focus. So, we're looking forward to what is going to happen, but also being realistic that there's still going to probably be some compromise in some areas, but we are very hopeful about the VOCA legislative fix and getting VAWA reauthorized.
Yeah, those are some really exciting opportunities for us and our work on the federal level. But, we always have to maintain our Missouri pragmatism and be realistic about what we can actually expect to get done and recognize that compromise has to occur all the time. So I think that is an exciting opportunity to see what can come with a VAWA reauthorization, and a VOCA legislative fix. And we know that those are definitely priorities that affect every one of our member agencies as well, too.
Absolutely.
So talking a little bit more about our member agencies and their involvement, was hoping you could give us kind of an overview of MCADSV's Public Policy Committee and its function and how y'all really work together. Because as you mentioned earlier, it's not just staff. It isn't just you and Colleen leading these efforts, but really also getting our members engaged and activated in the work too.
Absolutely. We, we are a coalition, and so that's how we're able to accomplish our public policy priorities. So MCADSV has a public policy committee. It is comprised of all of our board members, which are community members as well as member agencies, as well as additional member agencies from programs across the state so that we have geographic representation. So that public policy committee approves what are the bills that we're going to be supporting, monitoring, or opposing. And so we are having weekly interaction with them during the legislative session to make sure that it's not just our staff in isolation making these decisions. If at any point we're needing to say, we're just not sure, if this is something we should take a position on, or should it be a support or oppose, what do y'all think? Because we don't have historic precedent, we're able to get that feedback from our public policy members. And of course, those are individuals who come from areas where we have legislators in key positions. It's very helpful to have somebody on our public policy committee whose legislator is the chairman of Senate Appropriations. So we also want to make sure that we've got folks who, again, their legislators are in key positions. We also look to our public policy committee to really be leaders and being involved with our grassroots advocacy with legislators and being able to hopefully inspire other members who aren't sure what their role is. I think that can be very inspiring when you hear from someone about what a good meeting it was or how important and empowering it feels to have that great interaction with a legislator. So they're helping us with our legislative priorities, not only in what our positions should be, but helping to carry that message. Because legislators do listen different when it's somebody from their community. You can have a really good reputation in the Capitol as somebody who is there on a regular basis, and they look to you for kind of different feedback or advice, but it really means something to hear from the program who's providing services in their district. And that is something that Colleen and I can't completely replicate. And so we really need member agencies to be saying, hi, I'm the service provider in community. Here's how many people I provided services to. Here's what's working really, really well. We're members of MCADSV. So when you see Colleen and Jennifer, we're all in this together. And so kind of that co-branding becomes really important so that they do see like we are a movement in Missouri. There are many of us who care about our issues, and we will make the phone ring if things are not going the way we need for survivors in our community.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Jennifer. I think that's a great way of talking about it. We are a coalition, and being able to really show there are a big number of Missourians who care about issues of gender-based violence. And whenever we need to, we can get together and make the phones ring and really educate lawmakers on the dynamics that are happening in Missouri communities. I also think you bring up a really good point about the need for member agencies to really connect with and educate lawmakers about the dynamics of what's happening in their communities. I know that you get questions every year of, is this lobbying? Is this education? How can I participate in public policy advocacy? And that a lot of folks might be feeling a little hesitation of how exactly can I get involved? So just to clear that up a little bit, would you mind giving an overview about the difference between education and then lobbying and how members can really be involved?
Sure. And again, Membership benefit. If you ever have more particular questions and want to talk through a scenario, feel free to call. Because I do think some context matters. We oftentimes see some real shorthand answers to these questions, and there is some context to it. But in general, not every discussion with a legislator is lobbying. They are community members, just like you would talk to somebody in the general public about what your agency does and the services you provide. Talking to a legislator about that is not automatically lobbying. It's generally education and advocacy when you're saying, hi, we're True North or Hope House, and we are a 25-bed facility or 50-bed facility, and this is the number of services that we provided last year, and let me talk to you some about trends and needs we're seeing. Like, that is their role as an elected official. And we are talking to elected officials. Campaign season would be something different. So after someone is elected, that is part of their responsibility, is to know what's going on in their community. So connecting with legislators so they know that's advocacy. That is no different than talking to somebody else in the public. If you want your prevention specialist to be able to talk to them about the exciting new prevention program you're implementing, that's talking to them about just community education and advocacy. Lobbying is when you're really making a particular ask on legislative items. And I think sometimes where people get stuck is, I'm asking you to vote for this or oppose this, but there's a timing and a way that we are still trying to influence the legislative outcome. So thinking about that context. So an example I gave in training recently was, if you're meeting with a legislator and it's not during the General Assembly, and you're talking to them about the amount of domestic violence homicides that you're seeing in your community, that could be just general advocacy. Like, I'm telling you, we just had 5 in the last month. We're very, very concerned. Firearms are being used. Let me tell you what survivors are telling us. We are so worried about community safety. Take it to during Missouri General Assembly, and a domestic violence firearm bill is one of the coalition's top policy priorities. And we've asked you to come to the Capitol or do a virtual visit to discuss our policy priorities. And you're starting to talk about, domestic violence homicide prevention. There's a context to it that when you're talking about that firearm bill, it's probably going to be lobbying. If you're telling them about why this bill is so important and why it's important to have a position on it and support moving forward. So that context can be really important about, is there a bill filed, or we're trying to find a bill sponsor, and the timing of when those discussions are occurring. I think it's always best to err on the side of caution, because no matter what, there's a threshold for how much time nonprofits can spend lobbying, and none of our member agencies should really ever go over the threshold. So it's always better to err on the side of caution of saying it's lobbying if you're thinking, I'm not sure, sort of was bordering on it. But again, not every communication with a legislator is lobbying. Sometimes it's providing connections and resources. I mean, that's sometimes what my communication is with legislators. They've had a constituent request. They don't know what to do. Can somebody talk to this individual, safety plan with them, and connect them to a service provider? We get lots of phone calls like that, right? When they're starting to, ask our opinion about filing a piece of legislation, then they're really looking for some legislative direction.
I think that those are really important distinctions, Jen, and I appreciate you really talking about context, and that context does matter so much. I kind of want to wrap up our conversation today by talking about virtual advocacy. So every February, we have Capitol Advocacy Days for member agencies to participate in. And then in the summer, you, Colleen, typically, and members of the Public Policy Committee do federal advocacy days organized by the National Network to End Domestic Violence. I think that y'all had a preview of what virtual advocacy looks like last summer whenever you, Colleen, and a board member, and now the Public Policy Committee Chair, Jessica Hill, participated in those virtual advocacy days. But it does look really different. So can you kind of talk about what virtual advocacy is going to look like in 2021?
It is going to be a tad more challenging. It's not impossible. We're already hearing from folks in our public policy committee that they're successfully scheduling appointments. The reason it can be a tad more challenging is usually we'd say, come to the Capitol building when they're in session. If you're unable to get an appointment, know what your legislator looks like. You might run into them in the hall and you can just walk with them and have a conversation. That's not going to happen this year. We're going to really need to be scheduling appointments, or they may be kind of calling you on the fly. If you've emailed them trying to set something up, timing doesn't work, they may just go ahead and call you. But we still want member agencies thinking in February, have I reached out to my legislator, particularly the newly elected, to make sure they're aware of our agency, or if you've had any leadership changes, if you have a new executive director, that they're aware of that. Again, what your agency is seeing as trends, how many services are being provided. And so we're still wanting that during the month of February, rather than looking at those Tuesdays, Wednesday, those days that they're in the Capitol. We're asking folks to look at Mondays or maybe Thursday afternoons or Fridays. So the travel days, the days they might be at home for a while before they're heading to the Capitol. We'll want to get feedback from folks how that is going. So far, the folks that have started scheduling are indicating that's going well. And then also know some folks might be willing to do Zoom, others it might be a call. And we still want folks to be reaching out to schedule legislative appointments. And if you have questions about any of that, please contact me. And then Colleen or I would love to join as many as we can, especially with the newly elected, because we are trying to be mindful of, we are not the only agency who is going virtual for advocacy days this year. And because you can't just quickly grab somebody for 5 minutes walking down the hall, we're trying to be efficient with time. So if it is possible for one of us to join the call so that we can be familiarizing ourselves with the new legislators alongside our member programs this year, it would be incredibly helpful. We are a state that has a fairly large number of legislators, and so that ongoing relationship building becomes really important. And although we've got established relationships with the legislators who have been there for a bit, we're definitely wanting to partner with member programs to forge ahead with the newly elected folks.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jennifer. I think that that's a really good way of kind of providing an overview of how advocacy will look a little different this year. But there are still so many ways of staying engaged and being connected and really helping, just as you said, as a coalition, really move our efforts forward. There is a final question that I have to ask, and it's that whenever you are physically present in the Capitol, I know that you are kind of known for wearing your cowboy boots as a statement piece. So now that you are participating more virtually, are you still wearing the cowboy boots at home?
No, because I don't want my dogs to scratch them. And I'm really missing buying. I really miss wearing them.
That's a fair point, yeah. Whenever we have our coworkers at home of our pets, they aren't always as patient with us. So fair point there.
Another point I did want to mention is that connecting with the staff at the offices for the legislators is also really important. I had somebody ask me recently, they just sort of assumed if they did have a newly elected, wouldn't that office still have the same staff person? And not necessarily. Staffers move offices. So that they could have a brand new staff who's unfamiliar with your agency. So part of this is not only relationship building with the legislators, but also with their staff, because they do move offices, there is turnover. So that's also an important relationship for us to make.
Yeah, that is a really good point of distinction for folks too, that staffers change offices, and that's another really important piece of relationship building. Any other tips or advice or things that you really want members to know and understand about our public policy being such a benefit?
I was going to share what Colleen shared in our public policy committee meeting this week, which is for everyone, for us to all have grace with ourselves that this is an unusual year, but that we are all in it together. But then tying to your point of public policy as a membership benefit is, we are tracking as much as possible about what is happening into the Capitol. And so if people want to know before they meet with the legislator anything that might be helpful, we're happy to provide that in terms of background information or things they've said in hearings that either shows they need some education, which definitely happens. It happened in a hearing last week. We're happy to provide that. I mean, that is one of the benefits is, it is hard to keep up because of the number of legislators in Missouri and how quickly things can change, that we're happy to be able to share any sort of information that can really help folks with relationship building. But that, yeah, we want to continue to make progress in our laws, and how they're being implemented. And so we really need that ongoing feedback and support from individuals across Missouri so we can make sure that we're working on a shared agenda together. I mean, that's one of the other benefits is that we are trying to connect what you're hearing in Joplin to Springfield or St. Louis so that we can figure out what is something that is shared across the state.
Well, also in the words of Colleen, onward. Jennifer, thank you so much for being on Momentum again. I really enjoy us being able to kick off a new year and a new session by really talking about everything that's going on. So thanks for being on Momentum and providing us all the updates.
Always happy to join.
All right, thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks.